I've been trying to figure out how could Web 3.0 and the blockchain community hold in check the powers of the big tech monopolies. Like, is this possible? What are some of the barriers? All of those questions are questions I'm wrestling with. And one of the most helpful sources so far for me has been this book, and in particular, the first chapter of this book. So in this video, I really just want to lay out an example he gives about the relationship between developers and small businesses and internet giants. And this is a book that I actually assign when I teach my Economics of Digital Industries course, because I think it does a really good job of showing people how the internet is structured on the different layers. So really quickly first, I would like to lay out what is my understanding of the goal of Web 3.0. And I think the goal is actually to recognize that the tech monopolies have too much power. And even if you don't think they're doing anything that's really that problematic at the moment, they basically have the power to structure economies, to structure human relationships, to structure expectations, which play in with all kinds of economics and politics and even academia. So the power of these big tech monopolies, there's at least the potential that it could eventually be abused in ways that are harmful to the system, to the people, all of that. And one way of thinking about this is opportunity cost. Like if you're a small business and you get kicked off Amazon for either a fair or unfair reason, do you have another place where you can go and sell and reach enough audience to actually participate in that small business economy? And some people could argue, actually, no, there's no second best option. Many people who will be kicked off that platform just will not be able to participate in the economy. So Web 3.0, I think, is really trying to create that backup for the cases where the big tech monopolies abuse their power. Is there an alternative such that people can choose to move away from those big tech monopolies? That's the whole deal with Web 3.0. It's the hope for this distributed economic environment. And the frame for this example that I'm going to use is really the question, why is it so hard for distributed network small businesses to have a role, to build up power against the tech monopolies? That's the question. And the author, Evan McFarland, explains this using these three characters: Alice, Bob, and Dave. And Alice is going to be the app developer. And he starts out by placing these characters in the 1990s. And I think that's a very helpful way of looking at it. So Alice is going to be our app developer. She's a programmer. She's got some really great ideas. They sort of meet a need in the population. So that's her specialty. Bob is going to be a small business owner who runs servers. He has a bunch of computers in the background, and he's really good at getting those computers to interact with clients. Now, okay, he sets up the server-client relationship as a foundational relationship in the internet world. So it's worth coming over here and doing a separate little visualization of those two players. So basically, clients are just people. It's really anyone who would like information somewhere on the environment, and you can think of them going around and requesting information, whereas the servers are the ones who grant information, who grant permission. And almost every app, almost every website is going to involve this back and forth between people who want access to information and servers who find that information, package it, present it in a helpful way, decide if the person can get that information or if it's too private, if it needs to stay behind the scenes, if that person has paid for that information. So this back and forth between the client and the server is really key to this whole story. Now, who is Dave? Dave works for IBM in the 1990s. So, of course, IBM is the big company. They have economies of scale in various ways, but they provide the same service, the same servers that Dave does. Okay, so here's the setup. Alice, as the app developer, she doesn't specialize in servers because servers have to have a lot of knowledge about security of information, about how to grant access to information. There's just a whole lot of expertise that goes along with running servers that she doesn't have. So she needs to go to someone else to purchase that service for her app, or it's not going to work. So the question here is, can she go to Bob? Like, he's the small business owner. If everybody were to go to a small business owner like Bob, we would have a decentralized internet. So the question is, what's the problem with that? Why won't she go to Bob? And the answer is that actually some of the services that involve security and language, programming language development, and tools to make it easy for Alice to set up her app, a lot of that set of things that are needed if we're going to have a server that's effective, there's just so much economies of scale. Like, are you likely to get really high quality security from a small business? Or do you need a huge company like IBM that invests a lot of money in that security? And we kind of all know the answer to that. These economies of scale mean that if she's at all worried about the credit card information or the information that her customers are going to put on her app, if we're at all worried about that information getting violated in some way, then she probably does want to go to Dave, who's a consultant for IBM. And of course, this is the source of power for these big tech monopolies. Okay, so that's the 1990s. Evan McFarland then says, let's fast forward to the 2020s and look at the same three people. Alice is still an app developer, Bob is still a small business owner, and Dave is still, well, actually, now he no longer works for IBM. He works for one of the big tech monopolies that are involved in the cloud. So maybe it's Google or Amazon or whatever. Well, comparing this to the 90s, we know that there are way more tools for developers that these big tech monopolies have. They have really useful interfaces for Alice to use to make everything secure and easy. They can manage identity such that she doesn't get a whole bunch of bots that come in and degrade the quality of her app. There are so many different tools that these big tech monopolies have developed that Alice kind of knows if she tries to go through Bob, through this small business owner, she is not going to have a product that people will stick with. It's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be clunky. There will be bugs that were unexpected. There's risks with security. Essentially, the pool of things that the servers provide has grown and grown and grown in these big tech monopolies, such that the small business can't really compete. And another thing to consider here is if we look at who can develop an app on a phone, for example, who can develop that little small business that is the app. And it actually depends on how many skills you need to develop that app. So if you have to be a programmer and to understand programming language, that's actually a very small share of the population. Whereas if you don't have to do that, if all you have to do is sort of interact with a really cool, intuitive, easy to manage interface, then way more people can be app developers. And we might even think of this sort of inverted pyramid here, where the pyramid is set on this scale. And at the top, we have few skills needed to become an app developer. At the bottom, we have many, many skills needed to be an app developer. And as you need fewer and fewer skills, more and more people will meet the criteria of becoming one of these small business app developers. So essentially, if we're talking about Bob, this small business, he may not offer many of these tool sets, so he only has access to a smaller share of potential app developers. So maybe Bob can run his little server business, but the number of people who actually can go to a developer that doesn't have all those fancy tools is way, way smaller than the big tech monopolies. Okay, so if we come back to my question at the beginning, which is, how do we understand Web 3.0? and what it's trying to do. Well, what it's trying to do is it's trying to make Bob and a whole bunch of other small businesses like Bob a viable alternative to the big tech monopolies, such that if the big tech monopolies end up at some point abusing their power, then small businesses can go elsewhere. Small businesses like Alice, individual people can go elsewhere. There's this viable alternative. And that doesn't mean that there will not be tech monopolies in the future. It just means that you're not locked in to working with the tech monopolies. You can go somewhere else, and it's not going to be a huge step down that will basically just put you out of business if you're Alice and trying to work an app. That's what Web 3.0 is trying to accomplish. And of course, it's doing this through blockchain tools such that the different programming languages and physical servers, hard drives, tool sets that app developers might use, all of that suite of things that go along with being a good server business can be something that you can get outside the big tech monopolies. That is really the hurdle that Web 3.0 has to cross. So yeah, for me, this was just very helpful in conceptualizing what is the problem Web 3.0 is trying to overcome.